James Cagney walks onto a Warner Bros. Soundstage in April 1932 when a producer tells him his films are being sold in packages with bad movies to force theaters to buy garbage. What Cagney does in the next 8 seconds doesn't just stop production on Blessed Event, it introduces Hollywood to a word it will never forget: walkout. This is the moment one actor proved that even at $2,300 a week, you can't buy a man's dignity. Burbank, California, April 1932. Stage 7 at Warner Bros. Studios, a massive soundstage with 30-foot ceilings, hot lights mounted on overhead gantries, cameras on dollies, microphones hanging from booms, cables snaking across the floor like industrial spaghetti. The air smells of sweat, cigarette smoke, and the electrical ozone from arc lamps burning at full power. It's 92 degrees inside despite the morning hour because sound filming requires sealed stages, no open doors, no ventilation, just heat and humidity in bodies packed together making moving pictures for a studio that treats them like machinery. James Cagney stands near camera 1, 32 years old, 5'5", 140 pounds, wearing a three-piece suit that's already soaked through with sweat. He's been at Warner Bros. For exactly 2 years, signed in 1930 after Al Jolson saw him on Broadway in Penny Arcade, bought the rights, sold them to Warner with the stipulation that Cagney and Joan Blondell reprise their stage roles in the film version. That film, retitled Sinner's Holiday, was shot in 3 weeks and released to decent reviews. Warner offered Cagney a contract, $500 a week for 3 weeks. Then they saw the rushes and extended it immediately. Then The Public Enemy happened. That film, released March 1931, made Cagney a star overnight. The scene where he shoves a grapefruit into Mae Clarke's face became iconic instantly. Cagney's portrayal of Tom Powers, vicious, charismatic, doomed, defined the gangster genre. The film earned Warner Bros. Over $1 million in 1931, the worst year of the Depression, when people were starving and theaters were closing. $1 million. And Cagney's salary, still $500 a week. Till the initial contract, till being paid like a nobody while making the studio a fortune. His brother William noticed first. William Cagney, older by 2 years, had taken over managing James's career after realizing the studio system was designed to exploit actors who didn't understand contracts, residuals, profit participation. William read the fine print. Warner owned James for 7 years. Could loan him to other studios. Could assign him any role. Could work him 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, back-to-back films with no rest. And James had no say. No script approval, no role selection, no bargaining power, just show up when we tell you, do what we tell you, accept what we pay you, or we suspend you without pay and you don't work anywhere because the other studios respect our contracts. After The Public Enemy, William negotiated a raise, $1,000 per week. Better, still insultingly low for someone generating millions, but better. Then came Blonde Crazy, another hit. Then Taxi, where Cagney danced on screen for the first time since Vaudeville, where he spoke fluent Yiddish in the opening scene, where he nearly got shot when a prop gun was fired and real bullets passed inches from his head. That was the last time Cagney allowed live ammunition on set. Not because Warner cared about safety, because Cagney demanded it. The studio would have kept using real bullets forever to save money on blanks and squibs. Then Winner Take All, a boxing picture shot in March 1932. Mediocre script, forgettable film, the kind of project Warner cranked out to fill release schedules, to satisfy theater owners who needed new product every week, to keep the factory running. Cagney hated it, hated the repetitive roles, gangster, boxer, criminal, tough guy, always the same character with different names. Hated that Warner wouldn't let him dance, wouldn't let him do comedy, wouldn't let him show range because they'd found a formula that made money and why mess with success. Hated that he was becoming a machine, stamping out identical performances in assembly line films. But he did it, because that's what contract players do. That's what everyone does. You sign a deal, you honor the deal, even when the deal is terrible and exploitative and soul-crushing. Even when the studio violates the deal constantly, making you work longer hours than specified, assigning you more films than contracted, loaning you out without your consent, you don't walk away. You complain, maybe, you grumble, but you show up, because walking away means suspension, blacklisting, the end of your career. The studios made sure actors understood that. Leave us and you leave Hollywood. Those are the only options. April 1932, Blessed Event, a comedy about a gossip columnist based on Walter Winchell, fast-talking and cynical and amoral. Cagney was excited when they assigned it to him. Finally, something different. Not a gangster, not a criminal, a reporter, comedy, dialogue, the kind of role that could prove his range. He went to New York to see the stage version, thought about how he'd play it, returned to Burbank ready to start. Then came the production meeting. Producer's office, smaller than the soundstage, wood-paneled walls, desk covered with scripts and contracts and production schedules. The producer, let's call him Harris, mid-40s, balding, wearing a suit that costs more than Cagney made in a month, sits behind the desk smoking a cigar. Cagney sits across from him. Harris is explaining the release strategy, the distribution plan, how they'll market Blessed Event to maximize profit. And that's when Cagney hears the term for the first time, block booking. Harris says it casually, like it's common knowledge, like everyone in Hollywood understands how this works. He says, your films are the main attraction in our blocks. We package them with weaker titles, B pictures, programmers, the stuff that theaters wouldn't buy on their own, and sell the whole package as a unit. So if a theater wants to show The Public Enemy or Taxi, they have to take 3 or 4 other films too. Films nobody wants to see. But they take them anyway because they need your films to fill seats. That's how we move inventory. That's how the studio makes money on films that lose money. He says this smiling, proud of the system's efficiency. Cagney stares at him, feels something cold settling in his stomach. He says, slowly, you're telling me you use my films to force theaters to buy garbage. Harris laughs, not unkindly, but condescendingly. The laugh of someone explaining basic business to a naive artist. He says, it's called block booking, Jimmy. Every studio does it. Paramount, MGM, Fox, all of us. It's how the system works. You make a hit, we leverage that hit to move the rest of the slate. That's distribution. That's commerce. You should be flattered. You're valuable enough that your name sells packages. Cagney doesn't feel flattered. He feels used. Feels like a piece of bait dangled in front of theaters to hook them into buying products they don't want. He says, and I don't get paid extra for this. For being the reason theaters buy your weak films. Harris looks confused by the question. Says, you're under contract. You get paid your weekly rate. The studio owns the films, owns the distribution rights, owns the profits. That's standard. That's what you agreed to when you signed. Cagney stands up. Harris looks surprised. They're not done talking. Cagney says, I want more money. Harris says, we just gave you a raise. $1,000 a week. You're one of our highest paid actors. Cagney says, I'm your most profitable actor. The Public Enemy made you $1 million. My films are so valuable you use them to sell garbage. And you're paying me $52,000 a year. That's insulting. Harris's expression changes. Friendly becomes cold. He says, that's your contract, Jimmy. You signed it. You're locked in for 5 more years. If you don't like the terms, you shouldn't have signed. But you did, and now you're bound by them. So sit down, let's discuss the Blessed Event production schedule, and stop complaining about money you're lucky to be making in the middle of the Depression. And that's when something breaks inside James Cagney. Not anger, not rage, something colder and more permanent. The realization that no matter how successful he becomes, no matter how much money he makes for Warner Bros., they will always see him as property. As a resource to exploit. As someone who should be grateful for whatever scraps they throw him because millions of unemployed actors would kill for his contract. The studio doesn't see him as an artist or a partner or even a human being. They see him as an asset. A tool, something they own. Cagney says, very quietly, I'm not doing this film. Harris blinks, says, what? Cagney repeats, I'm not doing Blessed Event. Find someone else. Harris stands up now, face going red. Says, you're under contract. You don't get to refuse assignments. Cagney says, watch me. Harris says, if you walk out, we suspend you without pay. You don't work, you don't earn, you sit at home while your contract runs, and when you finally come back, if you come back, we add the suspension time to the back end. Your 7 years becomes 8 or 9 or 10 depending on how long you stay gone. That's what the contract says. That's what you signed. Cagney walks to the door, turns, says something that will echo through Hollywood history. I depended on you to keep your word. You didn't, so my only recourse is to deprive you of my services. Then he walks out, just leaves. Harris is still talking, yelling actually, threatening legal action and suspension and blacklisting. Cagney doesn't care, doesn't stop, walks through the administration building, across the lot, to the parking area where his car waits. Gets in, drives through the Warner Bros. Gates. Goes home. The studio thinks he'll be back tomorrow. Thinks this is a tantrum, a negotiating tactic, the kind of actor drama that happens sometimes and resolves itself when the reality of unpaid suspension sets in. Cagney doesn't come back tomorrow. Doesn't come back next week. Doesn't come back for 6 months. He goes to New York first, stays with his mother, walks the Lower East Side streets where he grew up poor, remembers what it felt like to be hungry, to not know where the next meal would come from, to watch his father die from overwork and poverty during the 1918 flu pandemic. Then he buys property in Martha's Vineyard, a farm, 100 acres, dirt roads, no pavement, isolated and quiet. He's always loved farming, loved the idea of growing things, of work that connects to the earth instead of the artificial world of soundstages and contracts. William tells him this is financial suicide. Says, you're not earning. Warner's not paying you. No other studio will hire you while you're in dispute. And the longer you stay gone, the more time they add to your contract. You could be bound to them until 1940. You're destroying your career over principle. James says, then I destroy it. But I'm not going back to being treated like bait. William, frustrated but loyal, starts working his contacts, calling every person he knows in Hollywood, trying to find a solution that doesn't end with his brother never working again. At Warner Bros., they reassign Blessed Event. Give it to Lee Tracy, another fast-talking actor who can pull off the Walter Winchell impression. Tracy's good. Film's a success. Warner executives tell themselves they were right all along. Actors are replaceable. Cagney was important, sure, but not essential. The studio keeps making money without him. Meanwhile, Cagney plants vegetables on his farm and wonders if he just ended his film career at 32. 3 months pass, then 4, then 5. Hollywood watches, fascinated and horrified. No one has ever done this. No one has walked out and stayed gone this long. Bette Davis will try it later, fail, return defeated. Olivia de Havilland will eventually win her fight, but through the courts, not through simple refusal. James Cagney is doing something unprecedented. He's waiting him out, betting that his value exceeds their stubbornness. Gambling that eventually, Warner will need him more than he needs Warner. It's a terrifying bet. If he loses, if Warner holds firm, he might never work again. But if he wins, month 6, Frank Capra gets involved. Capra's the chairman of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Arbitration Agreement Committee, a fancy title meaning he mediates disputes between studios and talent. Warner asks him to broker a deal. Capra calls William, who calls James. They meet neutral ground, a restaurant in Manhattan. Capra lays out the offer. Cagney comes back, remains under his existing 7-year contract, but salary increases to $1,750 per week. Some sources later say $3,000, but the documentation says $1,750. Additionally, top billing guaranteed, no more than 4 films per year maximum, and greater consultation on role selection. Not approval, not control, but consultation. A voice. It's not what Cagney wanted. It's nowhere near what he's worth. But it's something. It's acknowledgement that he has power, that walking out worked, that the studio blinked. More importantly, it establishes precedent. It proves that contracts are negotiable if you're willing to pay the price of suspension. That studios need stars more than stars need studios once you reach a certain level of fame. That one person saying, no, can crack the system open. October 3, 1932. Warner Bros. Hosts a luncheon to celebrate the settlement. Publicity photos show James Cagney, Jack Warner, Darryl Zanuck, and Frank Capra sitting together, smiling for the cameras like everything's fine, like they're all friends, like the past 6 months didn't happen. The photos run in Variety and The Hollywood Reporter with headlines about resolution and cooperation. Everyone pretends this was just a misunderstanding, a minor disagreement between business partners who respect each other. No one mentions that Cagney staged the longest holdout in Hollywood history. No one mentions that he forced one of the most powerful studios to negotiate. No one mentions that the system just changed. Cagney returns to work, makes Footlight Parade in 1933, a musical where he finally gets to dance, gets to show his vaudeville training, gets to be more than a gangster. The film's a huge success. Makes Warner millions again, proves Cagney can do comedy, musicals, any genre if they'd let him. But Warner doesn't learn, doesn't give him more creative freedom, keeps assigning gangster roles, keeps scheduling him relentlessly, keeps pushing boundaries. So Cagney walks out again. Same year, 1932, second half. Another dispute, this time specifically over block booking and profit participation. Another suspension, another negotiation, another incremental victory. Then in 1936, he sues Warner Bros. For breach of contract and wins, the landmark case, the one everyone remembers, the one that really breaks the studio system open. But that victory was only possible because of 1932. Because Cagney proved he could walk away and survive. Because the first walkout showed him the studios weren't invincible. The 1932 walkout teaches Hollywood 3 lessons that reshape the industry forever. First, stars have power if they're willing to use it. The studio system depends on actors accepting their powerlessness. Cagney refuses to accept it. Second, contracts are only as strong as the party's willingness to enforce them. Warner could have held firm, could have let Cagney sit suspended for years, could have destroyed him as an example to others. But they needed his films, needed his drawing power. Economics override principle every time. Third, walking out works. Not for everyone, not for actors without leverage. But for genuine stars, the ones whose names alone sell tickets, walking out is a viable negotiation strategy. After Cagney, everyone knows it. Look at what happens after 1932. Bette Davis walks out in 1936, flees to England, gets sued, loses in court but wins the larger war because Warner treats her better afterward. Olivia de Havilland sues in 1943, wins the case that establishes the 7-year rule that still protects California workers today. By the 1950s, the studio system is dead. Contract players are rare. Stars work as independent contractors, picture by picture, with their own production companies and profit participation. The factory model that dominated 1930s Hollywood collapses completely, and it starts with James Cagney walking off the blessed event set in April 1932. 8 seconds from standing there listening to a producer explain block booking to turning around and leaving. 8 seconds that cost him 6 months of income. 8 seconds that risked everything he built. 8 seconds of courage that changed the power structure of Hollywood forever. The farm in Martha's Vineyard becomes Cagney's sanctuary. He keeps it the rest of his life. Retreats there whenever Hollywood becomes unbearable, whenever the studio system presses too hard, whenever he needs to remember he's more than the roles Warner assigns him. The farm reminds him that he can survive without Hollywood. That he has options. That no contract, no matter how ironclad, can own a person who refuses to be owned. When reporters ask him about the walkout years later, after he's won his Oscar for Yankee Doodle Dandy, after he's become one of the most respected actors in Hollywood history, Cagney says, "I walked out because I depended on the studio heads to keep their word on this, that, or other promise, and when the promise was not kept, my only recourse was to deprive them of my services." Notice he doesn't say he was wrong, doesn't apologize, doesn't express regret, just explains the logic. You break your word, I remove my labor. Simple, principled, revolutionary. The 1932 walkout costs Cagney approximately $20,000 in lost wages, 6 months at roughly $1,000 a week. In 1932, during the Depression, $20,000 is a fortune. People are starving, banks are failing, men sell apples on street corners, families live in Hoovervilles, and Cagney throws away $20,000 on principle, on the idea that some things matter more than money, that dignity matters, that not being treated as property matters, that maintaining your humanity in an industry designed to strip it away matters. Could everyone have done it? No. Cagney had advantages. No children yet. He and Billy hadn't adopted until 1940. Brother William managing his career professionally. Enough savings to weather months without income. Fame sufficient that Warner needed him more than he needed Warner. Most actors didn't have those advantages. Most actors took whatever the studios offered because the alternative was unemployment and poverty. Cagney knew he was privileged. Never claimed his path was available to everyone, but he also knew that someone had to go first. Someone had to prove it could be done. Someone had to show that walking out and surviving was possible. The block booking system Cagney learned about in that April 1932 meeting. It was eventually outlawed. The 1948 Supreme Court case United States versus Paramount Pictures ended block booking, ended studio-owned theater chains, ended the vertical integration that let studios control production, distribution, and exhibition. That case happened because the Department of Justice investigated antitrust violations in Hollywood. And they investigated partly because actors like Cagney made public how exploitative the system was. How studios used stars as leverage to force theaters to buy unwanted films. How the entire structure benefited studios at the expense of everyone else. Did Cagney single-handedly end block booking? No, but he contributed. He showed how the system worked. He refused to participate quietly. He walked away rather than be complicit. And when enough people refuse to participate, systems collapse. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily, inexorably, the weight of refusal becomes too much to sustain. In 1974, the American Film Institute gives Cagney their Lifetime Achievement Award. Every major Hollywood figure attends. The tributes mention his performances, his versatility, his iconic status. But the tributes also mention something else, his courage, his willingness to fight studios when fighting seemed impossible. His role in breaking the system that controlled actors like property. Charlton Heston says, James Cagney didn't just entertain us. He freed us. That's not hyperbole. That's history. Here's what gets lost when people talk about Hollywood's golden age, when they romanticize the studio system, when they say, they don't make M like they used to, they forget that system was built on exploitation. 7-year contracts that bound actors without giving them power. Factory conditions where workers got injured and no one cared. Block booking that forced theaters to buy garbage. Moral clauses that controlled actors' private lives. The ability to suspend without pay, to loan out without consent, to add years to contracts as punishment for refusing roles. It was a system designed to extract maximum profit while giving labor minimum protection. And it ended, not because studios developed consciences, not because executives decided exploitation was wrong. It ended because people like James Cagney said, no. Because Betty Davis sued. Because Olivia de Havilland fought to the Supreme Court. Because eventually enough stars had enough leverage to demand better treatment. The golden age of Hollywood produced incredible art. But that art came at a human cost. And the humans who paid that cost, the ones who fought back, who risked their careers, who refused to accept that signing a contract meant surrendering your humanity, deserve to be remembered as much as the films they made. 8 seconds. That's all it took. 8 seconds to walk from the producer's office to the parking lot. 8 seconds to change the trajectory of a career, an industry, a system. Most moments aren't that important. Most decisions don't matter much in the long run. But sometimes, rarely, choosing dignity over security changes everything. Not just for you, for everyone who comes after. For everyone who needs to know that walking away is possible. That power is negotiable. That systems built on exploitation eventually crumble when enough people refuse to participate. Who owns you right now? What system are you part of that depends on your silence? What would it cost to walk away, and what would it cost to stay? Because James Cagney lost 6 months of income but gained something more valuable, proof that he owned himself. That Warner Bros. Had his labor for the duration of his contract but didn't own his compliance, his dignity, his willingness to accept injustice quietly. They owned his time. They didn't own him. There's a difference. And sometimes, the only way to prove you understand that difference is to walk away from everything and see if you survive. Cagney survived. Thrived, actually. And by surviving, he showed everyone else that survival was possible. That's legacy. That's what 8 seconds created. Not just one man's freedom. Everyone's possibility.